This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. Hi. What do you guys want to talk about? Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Well, at least I know these shows are still on Peacock. Although I've learned a lesson when it comes to streaming platforms. Expect the unexpected. And/or the only thing for sure about streaming in 2024 is nothing's for sure. I know the Stinger would approve of that quote. So here's where we're at. NXT debuted on the CW network this past Tuesday. As of then, all of the NXT library was essentially taken down from Peacock, excluding the takeover events, which I guess WWE does technically still own the property rights to. There's been nothing added to the CW library for NXT content, beyond a couple of clips and I believe the pilot episode from this past week. So as we head into this weekend, I still have no ability to watch the latest episode of Retro NXT we've been reviewing. I'm hoping they eventually move all that content over there so we can watch it. Because our hands are pretty much tied with Retro NXT reviews until that library becomes available. It's unfortunate, but I mean, it's apparently part of the tape trading deal with WWE and the CW network. They want the sole ownership of that episodic tape library. Now, for the time being, we'll still be able to stream Retro Raw through the end of the year. And this weekend, there's also a WWE PLE. Bad Blood. So we'll at least be able to do a full-length Monday podcast. I'm hoping by the following week we'll be able to see some of that older content make its way over to the CW app and we can pick up with the Retro NXT reviews from there. I mean, in all fairness, I should probably give it another week, considering they just aired their first episode on Tuesday. I'm not expecting the world of the people that run the operations over there. But, it'd be nice if they jumped on those old tape libraries sooner rather than later. It's like when you get the new title registration for your car. 5 months after you finally purchase the new vehicle, then they send you the official paperwork in the mail and you're like, oh yeah, I forgot about the title registration. It's probably what we're looking at here with the situation involving NXT. When will that old content become available? A week? A month? A year? Who the hell knows? But our focus is the Friday show today, so it's all territorial coverage. Make sure you all subscribe, comment, like the show if you have not already. You can find us here on YouTube and Rumble every Monday and Friday for new content and new shows. It is the wrestling channel that nobody knows but everybody needs. The 5 Starr Wrestling Report, baby. Going strong from our new location here in Worcester, Ohio. Still getting accustomed to the room and the different settings on the mic here. played around with it a little bit, but I didn't make too many adjustments. I do plan on buying a new mic relatively soon, because this thing is, well, it's a get what you pay for item. Amazon certified. The worst kind of basic headset you could possibly get. Off-brand trash that nobody's ever heard of. I don't even know what's marked on this thing. That's how generic it is. It was better than my phone microphone, but it is far from perfect. All right, so factoring in we missed last week's show because of my hectic schedule, I was kind of glad they immediately pitched to the studio this week so the announcers could fill me in with the details of what I missed. And boy, do they have stuff to talk about. I couldn't keep up with all the news they were throwing at me here. A couple of key things from the previous shows that we've already reviewed. Jimmy Garvin is still recovering from the leg injury he sustained a few weeks ago. So that's good news. And while we know Kevin Sullivan was responsible for the attack, he had some other mischievous plans for this week's program. He was somehow able to get Rick Steiner to defend the World's TV title on behalf of Mike Rotunda, even though Rotunda is technically the champion. More on that later. He's also trying to recruit more Varsity Club teammates, which doesn't bode well for Rick Steiner, since it's already apparent that they've got an end goal with him. They also had some big interviews planned, which we will cover when those segments come up. I did like here, when the announcers were talking about Steiner substituting for Rotunda in the TV title match, David Crockett had to interrupt Tony Schiavone so he could say, "It's kind of like a DH." To which Tony just nods, and he moves right along. Yes, for the record, I know what the term DH means. I don't watch baseball, but I at least know basic offense and defensive positions. Designated hitter. Give me my 20 points. So before we go to the ring for the first match, we have to talk about this Sting interview. It was classic Sting in 1988. First of all, it's great because for whatever reason, they decided to play his theme music for this interview. So they cue up his music. The announcers just kind of awkwardly stand there for a good 10 seconds waiting for Sting to come over. Eventually, he just runs in from out of nowhere. Literally looked like he'd been laying in a tanning bed for the last 8 hours. He's sunburnt red. And, I have no fucking idea anything he said here. You know, he did the usual Stinger Howe psychobabble. And pretty sure he was trying to promote the next Clash of Champions event where he and Lex Luger are going to take on Barry Windham and Ric Flair in a tag match. But they may have also been promoting those for local house shows too. So maybe he was just trying to plug one of the upcoming events. In any case, it was the most random 30 seconds of interview time. Complete batshit nonsense. Then we get Ron Simmons versus Eddie Sweat. This entire match was Jim Ross trying to get over Ron Simmons as the most white meat of all white meat babyfaces. And God bless him. I was a big proponent of Ron Simmons back in the day. He's out there having the most basic match you've ever seen. every so often they would pan to the crowd to show a few fans' reactions. They were literally just sitting there, bored as can be. By the end of it, you could audibly hear one guy in the studio yell, "Boring!" And, well, yeah. Like I said, nothing against Ron Simmons. But the say no to drugs, stand up for your community, say your prayers, eat your vitamin shtick. It was not the right fit for Ron Simmons in 1988. We'll just leave it at that. He won with the Spine Buster. And then he did another one of his generic say no to drugs promos, which he then followed with a very bizarre comment about child abuse. He called out every predator in the world that targets young boys and girls, told them to get in the ring with Ron and see what real pain feels like. It was highly unsettling. Not exactly the promo I was expecting. Oh, by the way, that promo got Simmons a handful of respectful golf claps. Him calling out child abusers and trying to get young children to avoid substances did not get a pop. Then we had Ivan Koloff versus Agent Steel. We are now at the point with Uncle Ivan where about 50% of the crowd is giving him a babyface reception. Now that we've established Paul Jones has washed his hands of him. And it's funny because right as the announcers are putting over the fact that the crowd is warming up to Ivan, that he actually has some likable qualities about him, meanwhile he's out on the floor choking out Agent Steel with a camera cord. Although we did establish in that interview a couple weeks ago, he's not going to change his ring style or sacrifice what he was taught. He's still going to be assertive and nasty. So he beat up Steel for a while, gave him a Russian sickle off the middle rope, but rather pinning him, he then called out Paul Jones to fight. Then he took another minute to target Steel and then pinned him flat after a couple of leg drops. The bigger talking point in all this was the post-match. Because right as David's about to interview Ivan, we have Paul Jones luring Ivan into the ring so the Russians could get the jump on him. And while they're putting the boots to him, who should run out but nephew Nikita in to make the big save. And I believe this might be the first time we've seen Nikita come to Ivan's aid since the betrayal a couple years ago. Again, keep in mind, we didn't review last week's show. It is entirely possible Nikita and Ivan joined forces then. But I do know this is the first time we've seen it since the split back in '86, when Nikita joined up with Dusty and formed the Superpowers. So big pop for Nikita when he showed up here and helped to run off the Russians, coming to the aid of his fellow comrade. And now we have turmoil amongst the Soviets. The battle lines have been drawn, brother. And now it's Ivan and Nikita squaring off against their own bloodline, so to speak. I really didn't think there'd be a day in history where we get to see the people rally behind the Soviets. But here we are in 1988. And they've managed to do so. Thank God it's only pro wrestling. Because only in the world of kayfabe could something like that ever happen. And in fact, I'd go as far as to say this was the best promo of their entire careers. Certainly it was the best Ivan Koloff promo I've ever heard. After Nikita took a minute to ask the people to open their hearts and give Ivan the benefit of the doubt, saying it's time for the Koloff family to reunite and stop Paul Jones and the Russian assassins. Well, then Ivan goes off on how Paul Jones is living in the age of Hitler, the age of Lenin. He's hired a pair of goons to fight his battles and do his dirty bidding for him. And while Ivan can't change his stubborn ways, he at least sees things from Nikita's point of view. His new Americanized way of life. And it is time for Ivan to reunite with nephew Nikita. It's time for the Koloffs to put an end to Paul Jones's reign of terror. And as God is Ivan's witness, he will see it through that Paul Jones is put down for good. I mean, it's a hell of a fucking promo. Like I said, the only time in history where I looked at a guy with a sickle and hammer symbol on his gear and said, I want to root for that guy. I want to see him beat the shit out of the Russian assassins. Tell you, man, pro wrestling is a weird form of entertainment. The only two Soviet protagonists in history, Ivan and Nikita Koloff. Write that one down in the history books. So after that, we pitched to the ring for Rick Steiner and the Italian Stallion. Again, it is a TV title bout where Steiner is defending the belt on behalf of Mike Rotunda. And the reason Rotunda was not defending the belt here is a very good question. I'm still not entirely sure. I think the explanation was Sullivan and Rotunda felt bad that they kept throwing Steiner under the bus. So they gave Steiner the opportunity as a means of making up for their douchebaggery. It's the best way I could phrase it. This may have been the only time I've seen somebody actively overpower Rick Steiner during a wrestling match. At least someone that wasn't double Rick's size. You know, like the Road Warriors or Megan Barbarian. Seriously, I couldn't get over watching the Italian fucking Stallion give Rick Steiner backdrops and power slams. Just effortlessly picking the guy up and throwing him around. I mean, he was easily 15 to 20 pounds heavier than Rick was by this point in 88. And Rick was not a small dude. Not by any stretch. But he's in there bumping around for Stallion, taking backdrops and hip tosses left and right. And like the whole idea here is to give off the impression that Steiner was about to lose the TV title for Mike Rotunda, which was made funnier when Kevin Sullivan kept walking over to the interview podium and going, well, even if Steiner loses, it doesn't count. And JR's like, yeah, it kind of does, dude. You signed the contract. Sullivan's like, shit. So he's panicking while Steiner's in there getting his ass kicked. Then the minute Steiner takes over and has things in his control, Sullivan immediately goes back over to the podium and goes, yeah, I'm just kidding. This is totally a title match. Which led to the best moment on the entire show, as Tony Schiavone goes, Kevin Sullivan is about as indecisive as your average wife. There's a momentary pause. JR, under his breath, just goes, what? Fucking awesome. I love when the announcers say something totally stifling that gets a genuine reaction out of the other announcers. So they're having a fun back and forth title bout here. Sullivan and Rotunda are giving Steiner a hard time through pretty much the entire match. Like, anytime Steiner lost some momentum, the heels are on the floor admonishing him and calling him a piece of shit. Stallion controlled about 80% of the match, too. And they really had the people believing that there was going to be a title change on this program. And from literally out of nowhere, Steiner levels Stallion with a clothesline in the corner, pins him 1, 2, 3. There was no setup. There was no build for it. Stallion was firmly in control of the match. He took one clothesline from Rick Steiner in the corner, immediately killed. And of course, afterwards, Steiner wants to hold possession of the TV belt, but they wouldn't even let Steiner hold the damn thing. Rotunda just walks off with the belt. Steiner stands in the ring looking all dejected. What assholes. Like, I know that's the point, but God, that's the ultimate ball tap moment right there. Steiner did all the work, got his ass kicked for the entire match. The heels won't even let the guy hold the damn TV belt for 30 seconds. Horrible people. Really fun match, though. And the continual decline of the original Varsity Club works its magic every week. We're just buying our time and waiting for that moment when Rick Steiner finally snaps. And he confirms that he's had enough of Sullivan and Rotunda's bullshit. So then JR had an interview with Tim Willett. Who? Well, this is one of those special interviews they advertised from the top of the program. Tim Willett was an NWA associate, for those that didn't know. And his job here was to promote some of the upcoming shows for the month of October. Mainly shows that were going to be spreading into the former Mid-South area. Places like Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Little Rock, Arkansas. I think a couple places in Mississippi. Now, of course, JR was very familiar with those areas since he spent a lot of time working for Bill Watts down there. So he was super stoked to bring some of the NWA talent to that area, getting a chance to reconnect with a lot of his former colleagues and friends. It's kind of one of those interview segments where, you know, they're talking about a lot of the local promoters and advertisers, former employees that help run the venues in the area. So they're plugging all these names, and I have no idea who any of these people are. It was a little too insider for me. But it's definitely cool to see them exploring some of those old cities and towns. You know, one thing I know a lot of fans, including myself, were disappointed with was the UWF buyout in '87. It was a big missed opportunity. You know, Jim Crockett and Dusty totally dropping the ball with a lot of that talent they brought over, all that cross-promotion they tried to do with the Mid-Atlantic stars. It just never panned out. And then I think it kind of pissed off a lot of the fans in the Mid-South area, too, because they saw so many of those former top stars get totally buried in the mid-card when they went over to Crockett, underutilized. You know, for the ones that never made it that far, wound up going elsewhere. It was also incredibly disappointing. You know, the Hacksaw Duggins, the Ted DiBiase's of the world. So I think this was kind of a way for them to hit the reset button and maybe gain a little bit of trust back from the former Mid-South UWF fan base, the disenfranchised ones, whichever ones existed by this point. I mean, it's been a year since the UWF sale. It's not like a lot of those local fans were following the other territories at the same time. But you still had enough of those former Mid-South names in Crockett by this point where they could at least draw sizable houses. They had Sting, they had Rick Steiner, they had Dr. Death, guys like that. Now, another big name they hyped for this week's program, the debut of Bam Bam Bigelow and Sir Oliver Humperdinck. Boy, one thing that never ceases to amaze me watching Bam Bam, you go back and look at his stuff over the years, all the various places he worked throughout his career. That guy never aged. Go watch Bam Bam footage from New Japan from like 87. Compare that to his WWF run in like 94, 95. He looks exactly the same. Same gear, same look, same ring style. It's amazing. Now, of course, this run in 88 was pretty substantial in the short term. It's a shame it only lasted a few months, though, before he left the company. Because they're about to plug Bam Bam into a pretty big spot with the Horsemen in the coming months. I know he ends up working with Barry Windham at Starrcade, but if I'm correct, doesn't he end up working a few house show matches with Ric Flair for the world title? I think a lot of those fall under the radar, though, because none of them were ever televised. And I can't remember what the issue was. I think Bam Bam was technically still contractually obligated with New Japan around that same time. They brought him in here to Crockett, so they couldn't lock him down to a full-time contract. I know he comes back later on and does some stuff with Sullivan as a tag team. But again, it was a pretty short-lived run. But he came here and immediately got the rocket ship push. So that was a pretty big deal at the time. It was a shame they couldn't get him to an exclusive deal. But he beat Trent Knight here. And then in a follow-up interview at ringside, Humperdinck takes a few minutes to assure all the champions in the NWA that nobody's safe as long as Bam Bam's roaming around. Called out all the managers as jackals, telling them to stay clear of Bam Bam's path and maybe they'll be able to coexist on the same roster. But again, they pretty much called out Ric Flair immediately. Told him to watch out because Bam Bam's coming for the world title first and foremost. So that was definitely an eye-opener if you were new watching the product at the time. It's crazy. All that effort they were attempting to keep Luger relevant at the top of the card, and especially after that Great American Bash debacle. Now they're finally presenting Ric Flair with another adversary. So I think you could kind of tell they wanted to phase Luger out of that top spot sooner rather than later. Which is why I think they wasted no time setting up Bam Bam as the next guy in line for a title shot. Regardless of whether or not he was ever supposed to win the strap, they at least presented you with another challenger that wasn't Luger. And I think the fans were kind of relieved of that. So after break, we had a Dusty promo, and he pretty much had nothing to say. This was a complete kill 2 minutes of airtime promo. Put over a bunch of baby faces, rattled off about 60 names in less than 10 seconds, spoke at about 100 miles per hour. Then he talked about Joe Frazier and blew a kiss to his mama. I'm not shitting you. That was everything that happened in this promo. And the people went ballistic for it. You see, that right there is when you knew the fan culture was totally different back in the day. If they tried this exact same promo in front of a modern AEW crowd in 2024, guaranteed half the people would have started a what chant. But in 1988, these people were just glad to have Dusty out there being a nonsensical lunatic. Because he was a star. And that's all that mattered. And that led us to the Fantastics versus the Menace and the Nightmare. I guess earlier in the day they figured, we need to give the Menace a comparable tag team partner. A mysterious masked partner who also shares dark qualities. But God, we got to think of a clever name. How about The Nightmare? Good enough for studio wrestling. So it's every fantastic squash you've ever seen. Either my eyes were playing tricks on me here, or Tommy Rogers had dyed his hair blonde. Because it was definitely not brown. They took turns beating up the masked jobbers. As usual, the crowd is going apeshit for everything they do. The only spot here I legitimately rolled my eyes at, mainly because I had no idea what the fuck they were even trying to do. There's a spot where Bobby is holding on to the Nightmare's arm. Tommy Rogers does a springboard leap over the ropes, lands directly on the Nightmare's arm while it is hyperextended. My first thought was, how in the world did he not snap that guy's arm off the bone? His entire body weight came down and landed right on the guy's fucking arm. What was he thinking? Then they ended up giving him a double-assisted slingshot suplex, followed by Bobby coming out of the corner with a running splash for the 3. But staying on the subject of the tag team scene, another big story they're promoting right now is the upcoming U.S. Tag Title Tournament. Since Beautiful Bobby and Sweet Stan are now the reigning World Tag Team Champions, they've relinquished the U.S. tag straps, and now there's a tournament being held to crown the new U.S. champions. So we had Bobby Fulton and Tommy Rogers at the booth leading into the second hour here. Got to talk a little bit about the tournament. But they didn't get far into their verbiage before they got interrupted by the Sheepwhackers. And admittedly so, this part was pretty great. This had me rolling on the floor by the time it was over. Luke begins the promo by calling the Fantastics, almost a direct quote, bloody, long-haired, pretty boy, Bloody Hicks. That is when you know it pays to be a foreigner. When you can just insert the adjective bloody anywhere you want as an insult. And I'm watching the back and forth dialogue here between the two teams. I can't even focus on whatever the fuck Luke is screaming about because I'm watching David Crockett's reaction the entire time. If you have not seen this segment, you have to seek it out somehow. It is the funniest goddamn thing. David Crockett is standing in between these two raging tag teams. His eyes are fully widened. He's constantly flipping his head back and forth, head totally on a swivel. And he's got that expression there that just reads, what in the fuck is going on right now? Meanwhile, the Fantastics and the Sheepherders are screaming back and forth. I mean, Luke will not let Bobby Fulton get a word in edgewise. I am crying with laughter watching David the whole time. And finally, the best payoff. The Sheepherders finish their deal. They do their wacky little dance offset, leaving the Fantastics to wrap up the promo here by doing another one of those rah-rah pro-American speeches. It was remarkable. Just remarkable. This was classic 1980s pro wrestling. I don't want to watch a Sheepherders match again for the rest of my adult life, but I will watch them rant and rave about God knows what on studio programming for 90 minutes straight any day of the week. Give me more fucking Sheepherders promos. Be the best thing on the entire show. It was surely better than Barry Windham and George South. That's not even to say it was a bad match. It wasn't. It was just long and painfully boring. And it didn't involve the sheep herders screaming and spitting into a microphone for 2 minutes straight. Barry beat up South, won with a lariat. Really nothing to it. I think George South fixed that wacky hairdo he had going on at one point. Remember that week he came out and his mullet looked frizzy and out of control? Like he had just stuck his fingers in a light socket? Well, he looked fine here. So I presume it was either a haircut or he used some of that pomade I was suggesting. Then pitching back to the booth, we had JJ and Barry there to talk. JJ took a few minutes to plug the big Philly cage match between himself and Jim Cornette. And I actually vaguely recall JC talking about this match on one of his podcasts. I don't think that cage match was supposed to originally be Dylan versus Cornette. I think they were supposed to do Tully and Arn against the Midnights. But because Tully and Arn had left the company by this point, and they had already advertised a cage match and tickets were already on sale for the event, they figured, well, gotta give the people something. So they threw the managers in there instead. And I think, if memory serves me right, didn't that match main event the show? How'd you like to be one of those Philly fans that already bought a ticket? You're expecting the Midnights versus Tully and Arn in a cage match for the World Tag Straps. And instead you get J.J. Dillon versus Jim Cornette. Yikes. I like David's setup when he went to ask Barry Windham about Sting. He goes, Barry, we have to talk about Sting. Barry just nonchalantly goes, no, we don't. I always loved blunt Barry Windham. There is a humorous aspect to him just being a dry personality. Really didn't know much about the promo beyond that, though. Although Barry at one point referred to Sting here as Mr. It was a bit odd. May as well just had him go full Caucasian and call Sting Buster Brown. Then we had Dr. Death versus Joe Cruz. Oh, by the way, this second hour sucked. Just want to point that out. Steve went over with the Oklahoma Stampede in about 90 seconds. Absolutely nothing else to say about it. Nor was there anything to say about his post-match promo. He let us know that he invented the Varsity Club long before the Varsity Club was even a remote thought. And, he basically just told us he was turning heel without explicitly telling us, hey, I'm going to turn heel. And more than likely join the Varsity Club. It is what we call in pro wrestling a swerve. Following that, we had a Lex Luger promo. Well, I'll admit, it was not as excruciating as I anticipated. It was still long and droning. But per Lex Luger standards, he at least got to a point somewhere within the 5 to 6 hour ratio, instead of the usual 10 to 12. He called out Ric Flair, said he's cheated him out of every rematch they've had. He plugged the upcoming tag matches with him and Sting against Flair and Wyndham. He did not remove his shirt. I was very surprised to not see a topless Lex Luger here. So he must be serious. But yeah, it was another relatively lame segment. Honestly, I don't even know what the fuck to say about the Luger-Flair feud. It is the same verbiage week after week, month after month. There's no development. At this stage, it's like, just do the fucking match and stop talking about it. Please. Now, as followed was Sting beating Terry Jones in a brief squash. The best part easily was when Sting went to hoist up Jones in a press slam, and Jones is in the air flapping his arms and feet around like a demented bird. This is the funniest goddamn thing. And then Sting beat him with a scorpion like a minute later. And then we had a JC interview. And boy, was it ever a JC interview. Had to make sure he drummed up some controversial talking points here. He noted the two biggest events in the last month are Hurricane Gilbert and the Midnights becoming the new World Tag Team Champions. Although when it comes to Hurricane Gilbert, Courtney noticed that there were 500,000 homeless people in Jamaica, and that was before the tragic event struck. He also used the famous quote about the Midnights being the only team in the world to make your knees freeze, your liver quiver, and your spleen turn green. He also added, bladder splatter. Sounds quite painful. So after he plugged the Philly cage match and promised that JJ would essentially die of a heart attack, well, then he introduced his boys for their match with Gary Royal and Jerry Price. I like how JC doesn't even try to present the idea that he could feasibly beat JJ in a fight. He was more willing to bet money that JJ would outright die of heart complications first. I mean, to be fair, we did see JJ wrestle on the studio show last year. If y'all remember, his physique was quite plump, putting it mildly. So while the Midnights were selling for the jobbers early on, JC was stealing Kevin Sullivan's gimmick earlier, where he kept going back and forth on whether or not this was an actual TV title match. He also spent several minutes burying the whole concept of the U.S. Tag Title Tournament, basically pointing out that the only reason the tournament's even being held is that none of the other teams were capable of beating the Midnights. And it's great because he's just firing off on all these teams. Every backhanded comment he could possibly make. Heel or babyface team, doesn't matter. He's just raking them over the coals. I can only imagine they're all sitting by the monitor in the studio laughing their asses off. And the best part right at the very end, after the Midnights win with a double flapjack, Corny wraps up his comments about Gary Hart, I think it was, saying he's the only person that doesn't have bags under his eyes. He's got eyes over his bags. David Crockett just casually interjects, "You been eating chocolate again, Jimmy?" Even David had some great throwaway lines. And that took us to the Ric Flair interview afterwards, where he somehow managed to flip between face and heel about 6 times in the span of 3 minutes. And I guess that's kind of what makes Flair an all-time great. The simple fact that he can go from asshole prick who puts himself over at the expense of everybody else to the company's spokesman where he's putting over all the baby faces and heels at the same time. all still virtually in the same breath. He's out there doing every Ric Flair promo in the book, talking about how he's the greatest in the sport because he's got the 20 pounds of gold. No one's going to take it from him, blah, blah. And while he's going off on Sting and Luger, then he brings David over to ringside so he can eventually turn the conversation over to Bam Bam, getting over the fact that, Bam Bam and Humperdinck were trying to stake a claim that Bam Bam's faced the top competition in the world well before he came to the NWA, to which Flair then goes into full babyface mode, tells Bam Bam to think of the NWA like a saloon. When he walks in and looks at the competition, there's 20-something guys on the roster that could feasibly kick his ass. And that includes all of the guys that Flair just spent the last several minutes burying. So naturally, Flair's sticking up for the company. Of course the fans are going to cheer him. It's like, only Ric Flair could pull that off. At the same time, I'm supposed to rally behind Sting and Luger to shut this guy up and put him in his place. That same guy is also putting over Sting and Luger as top competition in the NWA because they can believably take Bam Bam in a fight. I'm like, this is some Tony Khan level booking right here. No baby faces, no heels. Everything is 50 shades of gray. People are heel and face depending on what week it is or who they're feuding with. That's what this promo was. At the same time we're supposed to boo Flair for being a prick towards Sting and Luger, we're also cheering him by the end because he put over the NWA as the best product in the business today. Noting that all the top stars are here and it's the best roster ever assembled. And how could you boo that? This guy was something else. So at the point of the show where I'm starting to mentally tap out, they managed to pique my interest for just a little bit here during this Dick Murdoch-JC Wild match. Not because it had anything to do with JC Wild. I just wanted to see Dickie Murdoch kill somebody. But then I remembered, oh wait, he's a babyface. He's probably not going to be that aggressive. The most we got was him drilling Wild's head into the ring post. He also damn near broke the guy's neck with that brainbuster. And then Dickie did a fired-up babyface promo, talking about a little angle they shot during that quick squash, because Kevin Sullivan actually made a brief cameo, allegedly trying to recruit Murdoch into the Varsity Club, since he's looking for new members. So Murdoch reassured us that he joined forces with Dusty Rhodes for a reason. He made the decision to stand by his side through thick and thin. And whether it's in the ring, in the saloon, in the motel, doesn't matter where, Murdoch is not about to sell out for a weasel like Kevin Sullivan. Especially not with this surrounding crew of toadies. He tells Sullivan that he can take that pen and paper he brought out earlier and stick it where the sun don't shine. He can pay a visit to all the local bars in Amarillo, Texas, and ask the people who the baddest man in the area is. They'll tell him it's the Texas Outlaw. He also vowed that he and Dusty would stomp a mud hole in Kevin Sullivan and Gary Hart and walk it dry again. And that right there, ladies and gentlemen, is the moment we learned Steve Austin was not the first to use that line. It was indeed stolen from Dick Murdoch. It is a great merch seller. That quote. That is Southern slang cranked up to about 100. Then we had a tag match with Al Perez and Larry Zbyszko against Mike Jackson and Keith Steinborn. Barely paid attention to this match. Fucking 2 hours in and they're trying to subject me to an Al Perez match. You know, that's the ultimate middle finger to the fans. Zbyszko won with a neck breaker. No idea what else happened. And then they did an interview at the end where Gary Hart tried to establish his new alliance with Larry Zbyszko, which is probably the most random thing on the entire show. I will note one thing. They were very methodical with keeping the camera off of Al Perez through virtually the entire interview. Probably a conscious decision. All I know is that Larry mentioned the Western States Heritage Championship. That was the point where I said, fuck it, I'm done. The last thing in the world I wanted to hear anybody talk about was anything regarding that Western States Heritage Championship. I mean, the whole second hour didn't entirely suck. I was exaggerating a bit there. Most of it was pretty rotten. I mean, all the good shit came within the first 45 minutes. But that lead into hour two, and they pretty much had nothing going on from that point to the remainder of the show. And I know people are going to be like, Tommy, you're just impatient. You can't handle watching 2 straight hours of wrestling content. Well, that may be partially true. Trust me. When you get to the end of a 2-hour program and the last match you see features Al Perez, you'll understand my limited patience. Funny part is Al Perez barely did jack shit in that match. It was just the mere sight of his existence that turned me off. So in addition to us being graced with the dapper Boyd Pierce this week, we also had by his side, this is a direct quote from Boyd, the gold-throated Jim Ross. Hey, you learn something new every day. I never knew that was a saying. And if Boyd made that up on the spot, well, he deserved a raise. Because that's a good line. I'm going to start using that. Probably get some weird looks. Now again, we missed last week, so they took a few minutes to kind of recap the big angle from the previous episode. If you recall, it was 2 weeks ago on Midsouth TV where Barry Darsow wrestled the Junkyard Dog, and Dog ended up winning that match. We had heard from JR here that General Akbar had tried to pay off Darsow to work on behalf of Devastation Inc. in order to take out the Dog in his match with the one-man gang last week. So we pitched to edited highlights. Akbar is trying to run interference left and right, and he ends up getting the match thrown out after missing an elbow drop on Dog and accidentally hitting the gang instead. So the heels are in there brawling with the Dog. Best part of the whole thing, and the announcers drew attention to this, Nikolai Volkov is out on the floor with his arms crossed, not lifting a finger to help. He's just standing there completely motionless, watching as all these bodies are getting thrown around. And there is a story purpose for it, but the visual of it, it was kind of funny. And of course, the payoff is Darsow running out at the very end to help out as the Dog is being restrained. And they're teasing you with the idea that Darsow is going to hit the Dog, but instead he winds back and decks the gang and helps to run off the rest of Devastation Inc. Then he and Dog have a quick little show of respect before they cut away. So in essence, a babyface turn for Krusher Darsow here. Very short-lived, as we'll come to find out. And that's why it's kind of genius having Volkov out there, because he was clearly scouting. At the same time, I mean, you don't really know whose side he's on, given that he didn't do anything to help either party. So that's kind of where we left off with all that. And Jim also did a pre-recorded interview with Darsow to get his comments on the aftermath. Try to get some answers as to why Darsow came to the dog's aid. And, well, it certainly was a Barry Darsow interview. He's just a good old humble hometown boy from northern Minnesota. And he pretty much sounded as such when he tried to break down the story here. In the most milquetoast manner possible, he essentially explained that Akbar offered him $500 to take out the dog. But because Dog beat Darsow fair and square the previous week, Darsow realized that he owes Dog a bit of gratitude for proving he was the better man. So it's not about money to him anymore. That's right. Because American currency doesn't mean jack shit, brother. It's all about that Russian ruble. So you knew Darsow was planning the whole time. By the way, I know I joke about it every week. It needs to be restated. The Daisy Dukes have got to go. I'm sorry. It's just... It is so visually off-putting to me. I can stomach a lot of weird fashion trends, especially in 2024. But the Daisy Duke look on guys, absolutely positively not. That is where I draw the line in the sand. So then Darsow got a quick squash win over Frank Levert. Now babyface Darsow. I wrote nothing down about it aside from the obvious thing that I know everybody's thinking. Yes, Frank Levert was incredibly pudgy and very out of shape. His tits did in fact jiggle all over the place. Did you really have to ask? I was shocked Darsow was able to pick him up for the over-the-shoulder backbreaker. And that led us to a tag belt featuring Jerry and Marty Oates versus Bob Stanton and Doug Vines. And indeed, if you do not already know, Marty Oates was in fact Marty Jannetty. And while Jerry didn't have any actual familial ties with Marty, he was his trainer. So that was kind of cool. You know, Jannetty getting the chance to work alongside his trainer in televised matches. I seem to recall talking a little bit about Jerry Oates on Midsouth previously. Must have been during the tail end of '82, because we haven't seen him in a while. Oh, by the way, I had to mention this because I noticed it here for the first time. Reeser Bowden was making the introductions for this match. If you look close enough in the background, you could see there was a fan in a Wrestling 2 mask with a baseball cap. Found that highly amusing. Like, in his mind, he was like, well, I've got to wear my Wrestling 2 mask. But just to show how much of a tool I really am, I'll also wear a baseball cap. It's a decent little match. You know, Jannetty had literally broken into the business by this point, so, I mean, he was far from polished in the ring. Even his rope running looked awkward. But they did some good double team stuff at the end. Jerry ended up getting Stan to submit with a spin toe hold. I immediately had PTSD because Al Perez used that exact same finish on Crockett television. So now Jerry Oates has heat with me forever. even though this was 5 years prior to Perez using the same move in the NWA. I don't know how long Marty sticks around in Mid-South. I know it can't be long because he ends up meeting Shawn in the Central States area within the next year or so. Of course, we all know about the Rockers. Actually, before they were the Rockers, they were the Midnight Rockers. I think WWF would try to rewrite history and tell you they claimed the Rockers gimmick before Shawn and Marty ever did in the territories. So that brought us to Nikolai Volkov and Art Cruz, which Nikolai won in short order. It actually kind of hit me here just how massive Nikolai truly was, because he towered over Art Cruz here. And Cruz was not a small guy. I mean, he was a good 6'2", 6'3", maybe 225, 230. I mean, Nikolai just muscled him around like a cruiserweight. A one-handed 600-pound deadlift, as JR noted. The goals we all wish to obtain before we die. But we all know damn good and well it'll never happen. So yeah, Nikolai won with the backbreaker press slam. And then we kind of had the meat of this week's program. King Kong Bundy versus JYD. And that is speaking both metaphorically and literally. When I do talk about meat, there was a lot of it in this segment. I do believe we've seen this match on television once before. For the life of me, I cannot remember if they had a clean finish of this match or not. I think that was the match where all the heels ran in and they did the big schmoz. Yeah, I know, that narrows it down to like every Mid-South TV match in history. Well, in any case, the reason I mention it, I think this was the first time we saw Bundy do a clean job on Mid-South television. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong about that, but we've seen him disqualified for stuff. I don't think anybody's actually pinned Bundy in a sanctioned TV match. We've definitely seen visual falls, but nothing official. So this was kind of a pivotal moment for Mid-South television. I mean, overall, it was what you would expect out of a Bundy dog match. It's not going to be anything that would earn them 5 stars in the Observer Awards. But it was hard-hitting. Crowd was into it. There was a weird moment at the end where Bundy had Dog's shoulders pinned. And of course, he's having Pee Wee Anderson make the 5 count. But it was one of those things where the camera couldn't catch Pee Wee in the shot. So you see Bundy on top of Dog while he's screaming at the ref. Dog kicks out at what I believe we were led to believe was a 4 count. Even though we didn't see the previous 4 counts. And then from there, Dog was able to milk a comeback. He gets Bundy up for the thumb. It was more like a front power slam because, oh fuck, I mean, even JYD wasn't strong enough to actually get Bundy over his shoulder. His physical conditioning was only getting worse by this point. Definitely wasn't happening in the tail end of '83. But again, it's King Kong Bundy eating a clean pinfall. You really didn't see it too frequently. Certainly not around this period when he's been one of the most protected heels in the territory. Of course, you had to figure Dog would wind up being the guy to evidently pin him. But this totally worked. And you know that's only going to eat away at General Akbar. I mean, he's been trying at every turn to keep JYD down. All of his plans have failed. So we'll see how this impacts Devastation Inc. going forward. That took us to more edited highlight footage from the previous episode. They apparently did a Battle of the Hacksaws with Butch Reed and Duggan, but with an added twist. Lumberjacks. So we check out the closing minutes to that match where Reed's in the middle of working over Duggan. Of course, one of the very first spots they show is Reed press slamming Duggan overhead. It was at that moment where I was like, that's what's missing in pro wrestling today. Giants. Or just big fucking strong men in general. Masculine men. That's what we need more of. Kind of sounded like Vince a little bit there. So Reed comes off the middle rope and misses a shoulder block. Lands right on the side of his temple. Easily got a concussion out of that, no question. And then Duggan follows up with a spear tackle for the 1-2-3. And the key to all of this, Hacksaw Reed is still technically the North American champion. So even though we lost to Duggan in that bout, it was non-title. Therefore, the belt didn't actually switch hands. And you have to figure that'll play into the story when Duggan evidently calls for a title match with Reed. Now that he has a victory over him in non-title contention. For the record, no, I have zero explanation for the requirement of the Lumberjacks in this match. They played absolutely no part in any of the footage other than congratulating Duggan by the end of it. But maybe that was the plan all along. And that led us to Butch Reed versus Magnum TA. Also non-title. By the way, Magnum introduced here as co-holder of the Midsouth Tag Team Championships. Show of hands, who else forgot? I sure did. And to borrow another Vince phrase, since we plugged him a minute ago, JR even coined this one a seesaw match. So I guess that's where Vince stole it from. It very much was, though. Both guys were even Steven for pretty much the whole ordeal. And Magnum was solidly in control at various points. Reed would cut him off and have things going in his favor for a while. Then they'd reverse the roles. It was definitely one of those matches where you could see Magnum getting more and more comfortable in those leadership roles. Carrying the offense for longer periods of time. Trying to rally a babyface comeback and keep the fans alive. And of course, Reed still won in the end. But they even had me at one point thinking Magnum was going to score a win over him. There's a spot where he caught Reed coming off the ropes and turned him over with a belly-to-belly. Immediately in my brain, I figured, well, no one's ever kicked out of the belly-to-belly before. Then I remembered it's not Crockett TV. He was still getting that move over here by 1983. So Reed kicked out, kept doing more stuff. He had Magnum get in the hope spots toward the finish, but once Reed draped him over the ropes with a hangman's neck breaker, he pretty much had the win in the bag by that point. It is important to remember, too, Magnum and Duggan are still the Mid-South Tag Champions. So even though Reed beat Magnum here, Duggan still has that non-title victory over him. Kind of makes you think. Are they going to do some kind of tag match for the belts down the road? Or is maybe Magnum going to factor into the decision the next time Duggan and Reed battle for the North American title? A lot of things to think about. And that took us to Jim Neidhart and Sam Hall. Not really much to note about this one. We talked about Neidhart's debut a couple weeks back. His run in Mid-South only lasted really about 6 months, if that. He'll wind up doing some stuff with Butch Reed later on. This all predates the WWF run, though, so he looked very plain here in terms of physical appearance. Standard short trunks, a little bit of facial scruff. Did not have the patented goatee quite yet. most of his offense was just power moves, so he used a lot of that here. Ended up going over with a modified Samoan drop. And that left us with a few more minutes of airtime for the missing link in Mike Bond. A world-class standby match here on Midsouth programming. I forgot that Mike Bond wrestled underneath matches outside the Dallas territory. I also didn't realize how fucking tall that guy was until I saw him in a wide shot here. I'm kind of surprised to see them give Bond a lot of offense here, too. Like, they kept showing Akbar's reactions on the floor, like, how in the fuck is Max having that much trouble beating this jabroni? And eventually he turned things around at the end. Bond was completely blown up. Like, he was hitting the ropes and looked like he was about to have a heart attack. I have no idea what Mike Bond did for cardio workouts, but he needed to have a talk with Roderick Strong or somebody like that. Get a better workout regimen going. How do you get blown up in a 2-minute match? Especially when you look like you're in reasonably good shape. But that was pretty much all there was. I know I kind of blistered through the last couple matches here, but truth is you really weren't missing out on much. Doesn't seem like we missed a whole lot last week outside the little bit of footage they replayed. You know, they still got the Hacksaw Duggan beef with General Akbar and all the Devastation Inc. team. You throw JYD in the mix there. The big change, though, is Krusher Darsow's face turn and whatever this alliance is with the top babyfaces. Again, we know it's short-lived, but it'll be interesting to see how they go about dealing with all that. Especially when you got Nikolai lurking in the backdrop doing his own thing. It's all more interesting than what's going on with World Class at the moment. I even got excited there for a few seconds when Bill Mercer plugged the double main event card. It's like, hell yeah. See what grandiose matches they got planned for this week. Turns out they weren't grandiose at all. They plugged Kevin Von Erich and Gino Hernandez for the 7,000th time. Then they presented an even more underwhelming feature. Scott Casey versus Chris Adams. The brain trust of the time, specifically Ken Mantell, decided, you know who the people really want to see in the main event? Scott fucking Casey. Said absolutely nobody in the history of humankind. You want to know how underwhelming World Class Championship Wrestling was by this period in 1985? The opening match on this week's card, Jim Powell versus David Peterson. And with the limited knowledge I already had of Dave Peterson, I at least knew he was a name throughout the mid to late 80s. He was never a big star anywhere. I remember he did a few things in Mid-South later on in like 86 or 87. Might have actually been during the turnaround of the UWF rebrand. I think he was more of a mainstay in the Central States area, primarily working for Bob Geigel. So, you know, not really somebody you immediately think of as a big attraction during the territory days, mostly an underneath talent. That being said, who the fuck is Jim Powell? And why is he all over this goddamn show? First of all, he looks atrocious. Absolutely no physique. The worst mullet I've ever seen. Fishy white tone. It's not even taking into account the his ring gear. This is like the third or fourth week I think we've seen him wrestle on television. Why do they continue to allow this man to wrestle looking like that? Think about it. This isn't studio wrestling on Saturday TBS when the top stars are beating worthless local job guys in 2-minute squashes. These are long competitive TV matches in front of large packed crowds in major venues and nationwide broadcast. And they're allowing guys like that on camera. Beyond criminal. I mean, the match was mainly okay when Peterson controlled it. Anytime he gave Powell offense, it looked visually ridiculous. Especially because Peterson was like double the size of that jabroni. But he made a comeback on Powell, shot him into the ropes about 47 times. He eventually won with a back fisherman suplex. I can totally tolerate more Dave Peterson matches on Dallas television. But I've had about all I can stand with this fucking Jim Powell. Every time I look at him, it makes me feel better about my work ethic at the gym. As far as Gina Hernandez and Kevin Von Erich goes, first of all, I applaud Gina for combing his hair during the ring intros. There's a perfect dichotomy to Kevin standing in his corner signing autographs. Meanwhile, Gino's across the ring being a total mark for himself. I don't know if they ever specified if this was title or non-title. Not that it mattered. Mostly it's a big advertisement for the upcoming double hair match they're promoting for the Cotton Bowl. Wrestling was good. I mean, it always is when you're pairing the Von Erich brothers with Gino or Chris. Excluding Mike from the conversation. But you know, it's that same principle I talk about when it comes to either Kevin or Kerry wrestling Chris in one-on-one bouts. At this stage, Kevin versus Gino. I mean, we've seen it I don't know how many times. It really is just kind of the same song and dance. Sometimes you'll get a clean finish. Other times it'll be some kind of disqualification. You hear they actually had Kevin pin Gino clean. But it's all basic stuff. Gino's a great heel. People will always rally behind Kevin. So the psychology is on point. It's just the unfortunate thing we always revert back to. Seen it. Done it. Kind of over it. So a lot like how people used to complain about WWE booking, where you tune into Raw every week, and it's the same God-blessed guys having essentially the same matches over and over again with each other. It was especially problematic during the later stages of the Vince regime. How many fucking Roman Reigns Big Show matches did we see before we finally threw our hands up and said, do something else? I mean, at this stage, God, even the run-ins after the bell are identical from week to week. The heels try to jump the Von Erichs and cut their hair. I continue to scream at the TV asking how in the fuck they allow these guys to fight while a sharp projectile was involved. Somehow nobody dies. Then the heels get run off. I mean, because we all know they're not cutting Kevin or Kerry's hair. If we're lucky, maybe the heels will get like a quarter of an inch of Kerry's hair. Since he already had a long Jufro anyway. Probably would grow back a lot quicker. But suspension to disbelief kind of goes out the window there. At this point, we're just kind of waiting around to see the heels lose to the Cotton Bowl and get their heads shaved. Then at the same time, we wonder, are they actually going to deliver on that stipulation? I mean, hair matches are always kind of dicey in pro wrestling because you never know if they're actually going to follow through with the head shaving. I'm pretty sure they do, though, because I vaguely recall seeing those clips years ago where Gino and Chris wrestle on TV in mass through the remainder of the year. So unless they were working the fans in storyline, pretty sure they actually go through with it. So there is a satisfying payoff. And they follow that with showing some clips of the tag matches these guys had. There was one that dated back to the Labor Day Star Wars in Fort Worth. If you remember that was the match where they had the classic Mark Lawrence line, "Oh my God, he's choking!" Because David Manning took the bump over the ropes and accidentally got his neck trapped between the top and middle rope. And I think Mark didn't realize it was a work. So he legitimately dropped his headset to run up to try to untangle Manning. Fucking amazing moment in world-class history. The legit Baptist priest jumping in to perform an act of miracle. Save the dying man's life. Meanwhile, the heels end up powdering the baby faces and steal the victory. Not that any of that shit mattered in comparison to David Manning dying in front of the camera. There was also the infamous shark cage deal in Fort Worth. Actually, I think that may have been the Labor Day Star Wars footage, not the tag match. Because that was the one where Kevin was standing in the ring getting ready to pounce on Gino. They're slowly lowering Gino down from the cage, and Kevin's just patiently standing in the ring waiting to beat the shit out of him. Of course, the irony here is that Gino's wearing a full suit. So you get the comedy spot where Kevin rips his pants off and you see Gino's undergarments hanging out. Of course, they're purple, just to signify the man's a giant pussy. If it was politically correct to do at the time, could have just outright had the guy wear a jockstrap. Then the Dallas faithful really would have let him have it. Although maybe that wouldn't have been the safest thing to do, especially in front of the rowdy redneck Texans. But again, I ought to just kind of highlight the feud and sell the big showdown for next week's event. And then we had Scott Casey versus Chris Adams in the second main event feature. Before they even rang the bell to start it, my worst fears. I was like, holy shit. They're 20 minutes into the show. They've still got another 20 minutes left of airtime. There's no way they're actually going to have this match go the remainder of the program. Say it ain't so. Oh, how I wish I were wrong. It spelled bad news when it turned out the match was essentially nothing but 15 minutes of chin locks. Chris Adams held Scott Casey down in a chin lock for... I'm not shitting you. I know I'm prone to hyperbole sometimes when I make jokes about stationary holds for extended periods of time. I think this may have been a legit 5-minute chin lock sequence. It got to a point where Kevin came out to do a promo at the timekeeper's table, doing his best to hard sell the hair match for next week. And it's the worst promo Kevin's ever cut, because he's legitimately bumbling over himself and can't spit out what he's trying to say. Finally, he gets out something. No idea what the hell he said. All I know is Bill Mercer responded by going, "Well said, Kevin." Couldn't tell if he was serious or if he was just being a dick. In any case, while all that's happening, Chris still has this fucking chin lock on Scott Casey. And that's why I was convinced it was a 5-minute chin lock sequence. Because Kevin talked for a solid 3 minutes straight. And Chris already had the hold applied well before Kevin came down to comment. God, dude. This is the one thing I will always go to bat for with modern fans. I disagree with modern fans on a lot of their takes with pro wrestling. The 5 to 6 minute stationary chin lock and or wrist lock hold, it never ceases to suck. It's so bad. Like, you know how people often create fake terms in the wrestling world? There's something that got coined in the last 15 to 20 years. The rest hold. That's what this was. It was a stalling for time move. They had 20 minutes. They said, we're not going to do jack shit. We're going to lay on the mat. And we're just going to work the chin lock. And I was like, fuck me. So I left the room to go do something. When I came back, Chris still had this goddamn motherfucking chin lock applied. And then, as God is my witness, I swear I'm not making this up, Casey battles out of the chin lock, gets the people on their feet just a little bit. This motherfucker, after literally 5 minutes of nothing but two guys lying on the mat in a stationary, boring-ass chin hold, Scott grabs Chris, pulls him down to the mat, puts him in another chin lock. I begin to sweat. More so than these two guys did in the match. Which is weird. I have no idea how it's humanly possible to sweat when you spend almost 10 minutes doing nothing but laying on the mat in a hold. It's not like they were running the ropes. So finally they start doing some actual interesting shit in the last few minutes. Chris tries for a cross-body leap, but Casey kicks out at 2. As a result, he presses Chris on top of Bronco Lubitsch, which allowed for Chris to go into the tights and pull out the powder so he could blind Casey. And because Bronco is not a complete idiot, did he count the pinfall for Chris when he went to cover Scott? No. He saw the powder on the mat. He pulled Chris off of Scott. And he DQ'd Chris. Now, if this were, say, any time after the year 1995, well, the ref easily would have gone to count the fall anyway. And then you had to pretend like this obvious white substance wasn't sprawled all over the ring mat. Had to catch myself there for a second. But again, the officials during this time were not complete fucking morons. So there was at least some logic to this. I didn't even have an issue with the DQ finish. Despite them wrestling for 20 minutes and doing virtually nothing of value the entire time. I think I was just glad to see a competent official for once in my life. But yeah, obviously next week is the Cotton Bowl. I don't know if they'll actually have tape footage already in the canned air next week. Maybe it'll be the week after where they start showing the actual matches. You know, again, I could look up the card if I wanted to, but the hair match is obviously the big selling point. It's pretty much what they focused on the entire show. You know, Gary Hart and his gang didn't make one solitary appearance. So they must have not played an integral part on that card. They are promoting a tape fist match with the Iceman and the one-man gang. So we'll see how that goes. But beyond that, it's really all about that Kevin and Kerry versus Chris and Gino tag match. And the question of whether or not they actually shave somebody's head at the end of the day. So we'll see if they deliver on that promise. But that's going to round things out for this one here. And folks, thanks for checking out the show. When we reconvene on Monday, we will have a Retro Raw and the WWE Bad Blood PLE to recap. And as tradition here, I like to kind of look ahead and see what I'm getting myself into. The only match I know that's being booked on that card is Drew and Punk in the Cage, or the Hell in a Cell. But I heard it's not a very big card. Yeah, they only got 5 matches on this thing. We have Liv Morgan and Rhea Ripley for the women's title. Dirty Dom will apparently be above the ring in a shark cage. Yeah, Damian Priest and Finn Balor, which I think is just a grudge match. CM Punk and Drew McIntyre in the Cell. Nia Jax and Bayley. Oh yeah, the other big selling point too, because Roman's back. Got Cody and Roman against the Bloodline, which is Solo and Jacob Fatu. Now that'll be interesting. Kind of see if Roman turns on Cody. So, there you have it. Shouldn't be a long show. That'll probably be like 3 hours at most, which I'm perfectly okay with. And I'm also okay with the Saturday events. Trust me, I'm much more content with that than the Sunday shows. And again, we'll keep monitoring the NXT situation and keep our fingers crossed that some of that old content gets uploaded to the CW app. Because again, until we see some of that stuff show up, kind of have to put the NXT retro reviews on hold. But we'll see. So, thanks everybody for watching, and catch you soon. Take care. Peace out.